Hello, today we're going to take a look together at Chapter 20, the final section, and take a look at Eastern Europe and how that's changed today. And so let's take a look at that together to go along with your reading. We're going to see how the Eastern European nations finally stood up to the Soviet Union, and this also affected the fall of the Soviet Union as more and more groups and more countries of Eastern Europe began trying to go and chart their own course as opposed to being dominated by the Soviet Union in the post-World War II era. And also specifically, we'll spend a little more time on the breakup of Yugoslavia and some of the ethnic and religious tensions that are still there today and how the United States got involved in that. So shortly after the war, it became quite apparent that Stalin had designs on dominating as much of the world as he could under communist sway and control of the Soviet Union. And so America, being the other superpower at the time, began trying to contain, policy of containing that and stopping them from moving further west out of some of the Eastern European countries that they dominated after the Second World War. Such examples were in Hungary and Romania and Poland. These were all under puppet states of the Soviet Union. There were attempts, like in 1956, the bloody revolt that was crushed by Soviet tanks. Czechoslovakia also used force there, the Soviet Union did, to put down revolts in various countries. Finally, some success was noted in 1980 with the rise of Lech Walesa in Poland. Happened to be an electrician working for the Union there, who stood up for solidarity against the Soviet Union and was able to rally the Polish people to defy Soviet domination of their country. So in 1956, as we mentioned, the nationalists called for free elections, but this was crushed. Yugoslavia was also communist at that time, but a little different brand of communism under Tito. Tito was sort of an independent communist leader who did not necessarily take all his marching orders from Stalin, but he did hold together all the different ethnic groups in Yugoslavia: the Croatians, the Bosnians, the Serbians, the Kosovoians. All these groups were held together by Tito's policy of brotherhood, unity and brotherhood of the communist peoples. And when Tito died, then the Yugoslavian nation began to crumble. All these different ethnic and religious groups began to become more independent, as we'll study. In Poland, again, we talked about how they also were held under Soviet control, and despite some of their attempts, it wasn't until 1980 that they were able to get more of their own say in their own country. Some began requesting that the communists leave as the Soviet Union began weakening in the late 1980s, and they began to set up some of their own stable governments. And this then, of course, you have a power vacuum. As the Soviet Union pulled out, many of these Eastern European countries fell sway to criminals or dictators or any number of problems due to that power vacuum. Even though now more things were available, many of the people were left poor from the results of that many years of communist control. And also then, when the communist hardliners were removed, it gave rise to the ethnic groups could each now try to express themselves more. So that was another issue with the fall of communism. Particularly in Yugoslavia, there was a volatile mix of ethnicities and religion between the Muslims and the Christians, as well as the Serbians, the Bosnians, Croatians, who all didn't necessarily get along, but as I mentioned earlier, only under Tito. But ended up many Bosnian Muslims were killed, in ethnic cleansing by Slobodan Milosevic, and eventually the United States, under President Bill Clinton, began bombing of Yugoslavia to stop the ethnic cleansing that was going on there and to bring an end to the conflict and to try to get each of the groups to rule themselves. So those things were hard to contain, but we did try. So there was a lot of fighting. Both sides accused the other of ethnic cleansing, and after the U.S.-led NATO bombing, there was the Dayton Accord signed in 1995, which stopped the fighting, except for in Kosovo, that continued to fight for a while, and eventually Milosevic was brought to trial in The Hague, where he died in prison. So he never was found acquitted or found guilty in that. So now you have what used to be a large country of Yugoslavia right in here. You have Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and now since this map was made, you also have Kosovo down here. So there's Macedonia. So there's many different smaller nations there. So we'll be taking a closer look at the role that Slobodan Milosevic had in the downfall of Yugoslavia, and how his lieutenants Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic were also hunted criminals and accused of war crimes by the International Court in The Hague.